Hey y'all,
Welcome back
to
to the
the
Venus Report.
Venus Report. Yes, we
Yeah,
timed it.
yeah.
Perfect. Hell
Mm-hmm.
yeah. All right. So,
Awesome.
how have you been, Kate?
Good. Um, Feeling this in between eclipse cycle for sure. What about you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am too. It's a little bit hectic. I feel like it's just simply hectic a bit right now,
Mm-hmm.
but we're
Yeah.
working through it.
Yeah. I'm noticing like intensity. Intensity is present in a lot of
Yeah.
spaces and places.
Mm-hmm. I agree. But also, how cool is it that today Venus is conjunct exact to my natal Venus, Gemini.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
I always
Wow.
wonder kind of just what that will do, but it's never really that prominent unless you notice it, and then you're like, ooh, what's going to happen today? But
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
just a new moon moment, I guess. A new Venus
Yeah.
cycle ahead.
So we wanted to um, ask each other some questions and hopefully you all listening will get a lot out of these um, because it's kind of just like a lot of how astrology shows up in life. So, do you want to get into them?
Yeah, let's do it. I will start with you, Kate.
Okay.
How would you interpret Venus in the 12th house? I know that's your natal placement, so
Mm,
you know best.
okay. Yeah. Okay. So, when a planet's in the 12th house, I feel like so there's this energy of like hiddenness and mystery with a planet
Mm,
in a natal 12th house. Um, and when you have Venus there, you think about like your values and what you value. And for me, I know in my own body and in my life that I value solitude and quiet and time by myself so
mm,
much. And in those spaces, I can create more peace in myself and better um, output of whatever it is that I'm working on. Does that make sense?
mm-hmm. Yes,
And I,
absolutely. Like the void is what you value.
yeah. And I feel like that I also feel like my Venus is, you know, the energy of attraction and the energy of money, attraction,
Mm-hmm.
beauty, and values. That's what I think of when I think of Venus. And that's what
Yeah.
Venus represents in astrology. So all of those things to me are accessed by quiet and solitude and moments of like um, being in nature and being in the mystery of the woods or of the
Yes.
ocean. And in those places, I can access like um, the beauty that inspires me. And then therefore I can make decisions on how I want to like make money in my life, if that makes any sense. But it kind of like is the
Yeah.
key of like tapping into really what I value and what's beautiful to me, because that is really what
Mm,
drives me. And it depends also if you're like a Venus ruled person, if you're a Libra rising, you're a Venus ruled person, that could be even more prominent. For me, I'm
yeah.
Saturn ruled, but because I have Venus conjunct right next to my North Node and my Moon, it's like all of those in the 12th
Mm-hmm.
house and those being next to each other are like super powerful and visceral
Yeah.
because the moon's there and I feel it in my body. And I don't know, the 12th house is an interesting place to have a planet. And
Yeah.
sometimes planets don't like being there. And I don't think that Venus loves to be in the 12th house, but for me and my experience of having Venus there is like I love it. I think it's a beautiful and like
Well,
really amazing placement.
yeah. And I almost feel like because Venus is in her exaltation in Pisces, it might also just have like an exaltation vibe to you. Like it might just feel very predominant
Mm,
there and just more
yeah.
effective in ways.
Hmm.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that
That's a good question.
interpretation. Cool.
All right. I have a question for you. Um, So how do you, okay, let's talk about correspondences. And just
Yes.
for those listening, correspondences are what the planets represent. So we'll be talking about, you'll hear us say, the planets represent this, and the correspondences is that. So planets that represent or that what is another word for it? Like pair with body parts or other plants energies.
Plants,
Like it's where the
materials.
energies,
Yes.
yeah, like where the energies are symbiotic and similar. So, my question for you
Show
is
up
how do
on
you
Earth.
see,
Yes.
yes, on Earth, how do you see astrological correspondences show up for you in your life based on
Yeah.
placements or whatever?
Yeah. I would say mine show up the most obviously in like body correspondences. So I'm gonna whip out my handy little plant and astrology print right here. That I sell on Etsy. It's like a little print that basically explains the zodiac with the energies, plants, body part correspondences. So if you are interested in that, that's in my Etsy shop, Brilliant Pit. And this is kind of like exactly what we're kind of talking about today. So the biggest one that I've seen show up in my life is my Saturn in Pisces, and there's just more in depth with it I can get, but basically Saturn rules the bone structures. It's very like the energetics of Saturn and the plants that rule Saturn are very woody, hard, like long standing, and they grow in like cold areas. Like it's very similar to the plants that are ruled by Scorpio, but like in those kinds of like environments, right? So when you think of bones and things like that, and then you combine it with Pisces, which rules the feet, and like it's funny. It's like the feet and toes, right? And when you think of Pisces, you think of like how you're just kind of like not grounded in, you're just in a different way kind of like connected to spirit. So right, so it's just kind of ironic that the feet, it's like your thing that grounds you is ruled by Pisces, right? It's like how you
Mm.
go throughout life, your journey, right? But Saturn and Pisces could obviously come through as, in my case, I have bone spurs and like bone problems in my feet. So Saturn, it's like the limitation, the challenge, right? That Saturn, the bone is my challenge in my feet, right?
Mm,
Like I literally have flat feet. It affects my
yeah.
hips. It affects my stance. Like I have very bad like feet issues, and all of them relate back to the bone structure. And I hate this word, but bunion.
Yeah, I
I
hate that word
literally
too. It's
I
a
know,
bad
it's just
word.
it sounds like it should be something else, but
Yeah.
apparently like you're born with things like this. So that's why it's so
Oh,
saturnine to me. Like anything that has to do with like your, like for instance, I have a thing in my hip that's like a bone, I guess like not error, but like the way that my bone, it should be concave when really it's convex or something. And that is
yeah.
something that you are literally born with. It's not something that like you did and then you messed it up. And it's like all of these things, same with my feet, the bone spurs, all of that is like literally a thing that I was born with. So that's why I find it
Oh,
so
wow.
saturnine, and I find it crazy that Saturn is in Pisces and Pisces rules the feet. So
Oh my
very,
God.
very, very weird. And then I guess like the last two things, um, I would say like my Cancer sun and moon, I feel like come through as like well, it's not obvious, but Cancer rules the breast, the stomach area, kind of like this whole area here.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I have the most sensitive stomach to the touch. So like if I'm sleeping, like I can't have any weight on my stomach specifically, and I don't like I won't be able to sleep. It's like if
You
anything is
can't
like
have weight?
constricting, yeah,
Interesting.
like any weight on my stomach feels like claustrophobic and like weird to me. So I don't know if that's just like a sensitivity because my moon and my sun are there, but like this is like just weird, obvious correspondences. And the very, very last
Mm.
thing is my Gemini placements, I have Mercury and Venus in Gemini. And I throughout my life growing up, I've always felt like I had very fluctuating nervous system. And Gemini rules the nervous system, the arms, the shoulders. I think there's one more thing, but the nervous system is ruled by Gemini, and you can kind of feel that energy when it comes to Mercury. So if Mercury is retrograde, for instance, like it is right now, for someone like me who has a lot of energy in Virgo and Gemini, Mercury ruled signs, like there's a lot of fluctuation in my nervous system, I find. Like sometimes I just like
Mm.
won't, I'll just feel like anxious for no reason. I don't have anxiety, but I do feel like the feelings of anxiousness. And also it's just like this quick, like this is the best like energy I can explain it. It's just like constantly like moving like this. And then I'm like, oh,
Mm.
like I find ways to try and ground myself. But yeah, so that's probably
Mm.
the most obvious ways that I see correspondences in my natal chart and life. Yeah.
Wow. So that's so funny. I love that correspondence of the nervous system. And I also have heard that Aquarius rules the nervous system too. And
Mm,
I think Earth, like I have heard that Earth sign, I mean, I'm sorry, air signs in
air
general
signs.
kind of rule the nervous system because when you think about it, just
Yes.
side note, when you breathe in, so air, breath, when you breathe in, you're activating your diaphragm, which is kind of like
Mm,
the center of where the top part and the bottom part of your body are separated. And there's subdiaphragmatic and above diaphragmatic study in the nervous system, and the breath also can regulate your nervous system in a really deep way through the vagus nerve, which
yeah.
I believe that like most all air signs correspond to the nervous system in some way. And this might
Yeah.
be getting really down into detail, but I think Gemini is the lungs because of the two, right? You said lungs, Gemini, and
Mm-hmm.
that's more of like the breathing nervous system. And
Yep.
Aquarius rules like the overall energy field of your nervous system,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you could say, and you could also say that Libra rules like your kidneys, your other organs of the nervous system, like your endocrine system. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just a side note. That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, okay. Next question for you, Kate.
Sure.
Um, how would you, I guess, how do you work with correspondences and how would you interpret like what they are in your own way?
Yeah. I think I think correspondences are a great way to understand the energy of each sign. And so that's where I enter into correspondences. That's how I approach it. So I go to the body as well. So
Mm-hmm.
there's qualities of each sign, and then there's correspondences. So um, so for Aries, representing the head and the brain and the eyes, and also the
Mm-hmm.
muscles. So like how we take action and how like what muscles propel action. And that for me lets
Mm-hmm.
me understand Aries energy. Um, and then
And also, yeah,
Taurus,
like the face and
yeah,
like
the
identity.
face,
Yeah.
yeah. And Taurus rules the throat and the ears. So listening and speaking very much have an importance when it comes to like Taurian energy. So something that I've seen show up in my life that is so interesting and that makes me like so interested in astrology's mystery and teachings, is that so Taurus, it rules my fifth house. So that means I have Taurus in my fifth house. And lately, I've been really creatively expressing in a new way through my voice and through listening to music and through singing and speaking. And Taurus again rules the throat and the ears, and it rules my fifth house of creative expression. So like those things are undeniable to me, and I'm like, okay, my Taurus energy shows up through my fifth house, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
that's how I express. So when I like look at correspondences, I look at whatever planet is in, or whatever sign rules a certain house. And I say, so for example, like if I have Leo in the eighth house, which I have Leo in the eighth house, Leo rules the heart and the spine, which I'm looking at my reference guide here. And in the eighth house is all about transformation. And like the work that I'm involved in is like showing up with my heart and transforming through like ceremony or whatever it may be. But like that, those combinations are just so present in my reality. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. And like,
Yes.
and I can even make an inference that I don't even know. So like, for example, what rules my 10th house? Libra rules my 10th house. 10th house is about career. Libra, air sign. Libra rules, again, the nervous system, but also the kidneys and the endocrine system. So this one's interesting. Like my career is Libra, and it's like this energy of aesthetic and like balance and harmony, which is absolutely
Mm-hmm.
what I'm trying to accomplish. Um, and that's the focus. And my nervous system is like oriented in that direction. And like I find I find that aesthetic is really calming to my nervous system, which is
Yes. Yeah.
like undeniable
And can
correspondence,
I,
right?
yes, can I just say something though? Also, what you
Yeah.
just said about Taurus ruling your fifth house, your
Yeah.
creativity is based on sensation, and
Yes.
it directly corresponds with the 10th house, right? Is that, nope, that's not directly across, but your
No.
both
Yeah.
both of your Venus ruled places in your chart, right? So Libra and Taurus,
Hmm.
wherever that rules in your chart, that can show kind of like, and it's just funny that like you in your career, how it's ruled by Venus, you really value creativity, Venusian values like sensation, like you really value aesthetics, and
Hmm.
in your career, like that would be also like I could see somebody else, like for instance, if we're not talking about you, somebody who really is like values being an interior designer as like a career, you know what I mean? That's how I see like Libra
Hmm.
ruling the 10th house, also just
Hmm.
ways that like, yeah. And I just find it interesting that
Hmm.
that's your like your Venus ruled houses rule the house of creativity and your house of career. I just find that like very
Oh, yeah.
very
I didn't even
cool.
like think about that. Yeah, because we're on a Venus
Mm-hmm.
theme because I just went fifth house, 10th house, 10th house.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how correspondences show up for me. And there's so many like um I love the how Sag rules the hips and the thighs and the, like the blood circulation. And that makes so much sense
Yeah.
to me. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just like this constant flow of life.
Yeah.
Um,
And you know what else is like just super cool with like I like when how Virgo rules um also it's like I find a weird correspondence with Virgo and Gemini, not only because Mercury rules them, but like when you think about Mercury, I kind of think of it more as like predominantly air energy, but then it
mhm,
can shapeshift into earth in ways
mhm, yeah,
when we're thinking about the line of logic. So it's like,
yes,
but I like that Virgo,
yeah.
like I find that how Virgo rules the digestive, digestive, Jesus Christ, system. Um, I find that very interesting, like that pathway of the air energy with like breath work, and then it makes its way to Earth by like,
Hmm.
okay, now it's down in the system and now it affects digestion, because that all breath work like really does coincide not only with the nervous system, but like digestion is everything at the end of the day. Like that's like one of the biggest systems I'm learning
Hmm.
about in like your health and like even immunity. Like if that part of your system is like not in check, other things with your health will go wrong, which is just so Virgo. It's like I feel like Virgo is that thing though. It's like that precipice. It's like I'm here and I kind of like have this effect on things. Like sixth
Mm,
house, you know?
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I find that really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
Yeah.
cool. Okay. Next question. How would you interpret your Venus in Gemini? Because Venus is in Gemini right now as we're speaking. And it's April 28th, right? Is that the date?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so how would you interpret your Venus in Gemini and your Mercury in Gemini?
Yeah. Well, I would say the biggest thing that stands out to me is like the various interests and like just the various interests that I've always held throughout my life, like and and also I've always felt that Gemini has shown up in my life in ways where I've always had a very, very vivid, in my own experience, like dichotomy of my interests. Like, I feel like I have one side of me that loves, like, very colorful things like I and travel and like all these other things, and then there's another side of me that likes really dark, like Scorpio, and but like equally they like make me who I am. And I just always have felt like there's definitely like this Gemini energy in me that is like present in my interests and values, like at heart. Like the things that I hold valuable to me and the things that I like really are interested in are very like deeply held, you know what I mean? um
Mm,
So here it's like Venus is in Mercury's home. Mercury is in Mercury's home. So there's just this overall vibe of Mercury, right? Like communication, the day to day, the environment, all the like little nuanced things in life. And with this, I find like organizational things to be really like beautifully appealing to me. And like I don't know, like not
organization, Virgo.
yes, like organization, things that just have um I think I wrote like a complementary theme. So and I just found that to be so interesting, like when things complement one another, that's what I find like the most beautiful. And it's like I can't think of an example right now, but I guess like very like for instance, think of like a wall, and like say it had wallpaper, but then and it was like this crazy design wallpaper, and then you have to find the right color to be the trim, and it just has to be a plain thing, like organizing plain things with really exotic things but having them complement each other is like I feel like that comes through with my Gemini placements very predominantly.
Interesting.
um yes, like colors, textures matching in ways like that's something that I've always really liked. And then just some other things like finding common ground. Like finding the like middle of something. And I that's another play on like this double bodiedness of a sign, is like just finding the common ground. So like I find in relationships, right? Like Venus. It's like I'm always like it's like finding the common ground, and like making compromise, like things that are back and forth, and things that like also just like have this like commonality with them, and like emphasizing that I find is also a
Mm.
Gemini placement thing.
Do you
um
think like
and very
do you do you think that is because it's like the sign of the twins?
Yeah, I think like Gemini for me shows up in the obvious way of like two things. Like it's always like this like two two major things, like
Like
finding
duality?
a way. Yes, but not opposites, right? Like it's just two things that are different, and finding ways to like integrate them in the way of like similarity.
Hmm.
So yeah, and I feel like that's the Venus part. It's like the Venus wants to find like the harmonious way of balancing it out. So it's like finding the common thing with that, and like exuding both things at the same time. Like that what I just said, like that resonates with me so much. Um,
Mm,
and I just find it so funny that like Venus is right on top of my Venus today. That's I feel like maybe I'm also communicating in a way
mm,
that's like very attached to what
mhm,
that is for me. Last
mm,
thing, mental stimulation. So I feel like that's something I value in relationships in general is just like the conversation and the like depth of like what we're talking and communicating about, right? So like learning, sharing interests. I even wrote down like sharing the love of like movies, series, and books, which I feel like most people would coin as like a Virgo thing. I also have Mars in Virgo, so that probably is also part of it. But like, I feel like that's also a Mercury thing, is like finding like your interests and like sharing them with your loved one or like loved ones, right? And like communicating that similarity thing, right? Like finding what somebody else likes in a certain thing that you like too, and like finding the commonality. So
mm, mhm, mm,
that would be my Venus, Mercury, and Gemini interpretation.
mm. That's so interesting. I feel like that's because Venus in an air sign is always, I don't know, Venus and Gemini is just interesting to me. And it's here right
Mm-hmm.
now too, so I'm like, how is this showing up in like what people are valuing right now and what are people valuing in relationships?
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah. I feel like it's definitely the vibe of just like many little things. It's like do 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 do,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah,
It's like speedy. It's like,
yes, it's like let's talk and let's go into these little tangents and like find interests and
yeah,
like common ground. Like I don't know. I
common
feel like
ground.
that's a thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm,
All right, Kate. Last question for you. Do
mm-hmm.
you feel like astrology is an absolute, or can you sort of rewrite your birth chart?
Oh my God, good question. No, I don't feel like astrology is an absolute, and I will say that. And yes, you can rewrite your birth chart. So you're not doomed by your placements. That's like a
Yeah.
huge misconception about astrology is you are not doomed to be a disorganized Gemini sun and a stubborn Taurus rising and an emotional Scorpio moon. Like that's not your, you know, that's not you're not doomed. So
Yeah.
the thing I like about this is like working with astrology is so potent because you can understand like the energy that you are most likely to like mold yourself into and feel um, satisfied with. So like I love looking at my birth chart because I find something new every day and I'm like, "Oh, my Scorpio sun, like I can be like a sunny type of Scorpio and I don't have to be this like dark stereotypical Scorpio. That's why I sometimes really hate astrology memes because it's like putting shit in a box. And like no, not all Scorpio suns present the same way. Like that is an absolute truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at your chart or when you get like a reading or like you just see astrology memes, you're like, okay, that doesn't resonate with like who I am. Or maybe you're like, am I supposed to be expressing that way because I'm a Scorpio sun? Or am I supposed to be
Exactly.
like wild because I'm a Sagittarius? Like, am I supposed to be like file cabinet energy because I'm a fucking Virgo? And it's like,
File cabinet
no,
energy.
like yeah, and like those are just are energies that are present in you and you have all of the whole zodiac in you and you can choose which ones to tap into that will serve your best interest. So like
Mm-hmm.
something that is like a real life example where you can work through a placement is for me I've worked through this not so great placement of having Chiron in the eighth house in Leo. And I mean, Chiron is the wounded healer. It's kind of it brings pain, so it's not a good placement really anywhere. But
Mm.
For me, it like shows up in how I express myself in my expression. Leo is all about like being exuberant and being proud and bold. And I desire to be that way, right? And
Yeah.
because I have Chiron there, I haven't always desired to be that way, but I have recently because I've been working through some transformational stuff. And naturally, my Chiron placement has come up and shown me, hey, you have an issue with being seen. You have an issue with being seen when you're in like a transformational period. Like you want people to see you as like put together and solid, and you're very much not. And that's a pain point for me and has been. So
Mm.
working through and rewriting my chart of like, oh, I'm gonna have a Chiron that's like activated, and I'm gonna like love my that placement a lot and work through it so I can then show up on the other side of it and be a helper, um, with that aspect. Like I can,
Yeah.
I've worked through that aspect of being seen, and I'm still working through it. But I've worked through a lot of that being seen in me, because I realized, like as I got older, I was like, I need to do important work in the world, and I like need to be seen. And even when it feels really uncomfortable, I know that I'm helping people on such a deep level because my Scorpio sun really wants to go deep. And like,
Yes.
so in a way, does that make sense? Like in a way, you're like rewriting and you're like redefining your chart for yourself. You're saying, oh, I have this placement, but I'm not like a victim of it. I can
Yeah.
use it and work through it. Like, and I think people sometimes can make excuses like, oh, I'm just, I'm a Aries, so forgive me for being super rude, right? And it's like, well, you can either make
Yeah.
excuses and be a shitty person and say, oh, I'm just an Aries. And I'm not saying Aries are shitty people, but like that's an example. So
Yeah, no,
there's also
totally.
yeah, yeah. It's you can absolutely rewrite your birth chart and you can choose which energies to like tap into. So like because I don't have any planets in Virgo, I like to tap into Virgo energy and like say because we have all of the energies within us. It's not that if you have an empty
Exactly.
house, you don't have that energy. Like I was talking to somebody the other day, about empty houses. And she was like, "Oh, I don't have that energy. There's like nothing there." And I'm like, "No, there is. There absolutely is." And it might be like
Yeah.
really medicinal for you to tap into that,
And the
you know?
best ways that you can tap into that is by seeing the house that it rules and like finding ways to go about life in those areas and like just tap into that energy, and
Yeah.
what that is for
Be-
you. But absolutely, you can rewrite your birth chart
mhm.
or just reinterpret your birth chart, meaning like redefine
Yeah.
what it means to you. Don't look at it in the same lens that you saw it when you first saw it. Look at it from a lens of how can this benefit me? How can I make this work for me, not against me?
Yeah, that's the whole point of astrology. Like that's the whole point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love it. Love that
Exactly.
question. Um,
Love
okay,
it.
question for you. Last question for you. Um, what would you say the biggest misconceptions about astrology are?
Yes. I love that question. So basically like I think it kind of goes along with your answer. The idea that you are defined by your natal chart placements, which not true at all, as we
Mm,
just kind of went into. But yes, using your natal chart as a tool. That's how I would like kind of resolve that misconception is like use it as a tool to guide you, not to define you, right? So
mm,
using your tough Chiron placement, like Kate said, because Chiron is there's no good place for Chiron to be, right? So like
yeah.
mine is in the 11th house with my Mars in Virgo, right? It's like conjunct, I'm pretty sure. So it's like, how can I emphasize the Mars energy to work with the wounded healer, right? So it's like maybe that's part of my actions, how I take action in like a Virgo scenarios, right? Like with my health, if I take healthy actions with like in terms of my health, then maybe my Chiron will come through in a more positive light. Things like that. Um,
Mm,
I would say another misconception about astrology is like that compatibility is like just purely based on like your sun sign. And I really
Yeah.
just, it's like, that's really not where it ends. And I would say it actually has way, way, way more to do with Mercury, Venus, and Mars, to be honest, versus your sun. So
Hmm.
I would look to all three of those planets in your chart, as well as the person that you are interested in seeing the compatibility with, because that will give you more of a conversational awareness around what kind of interactions you'll have together, as well as it will just give you more of like a well-rounded picture of it all. So that's
Mm,
number two. Last
yes.
one. Last
Mm,
one. There is no placement that exists that is good or bad, and that is also kind of something we touched on just now. But it basically, I like to see things as like it is what it is. Nothing is meant to be good or bad for you. It's just meant to be what it is and how you see it, right? It's all about our perception. If people are like, oh, wow, like, um, Leo is just like the most bright sign, right? And then if our society and our culture tends to just like think that way, then we'll think, oh, well, if you're an Aquarius, you're like the opposite of that. And that's not true at all.
mm,
Like, you know what I mean? So it's just about
mm,
your perception. Don't listen to perceptions that like you don't resonate with at your core, like with your intuition and your heart, and really take things just as they are and work with them. Like work integrate yourself into the energy that is, for me, right? It would be Virgo because Chiron is there, maybe even Scorpio because Pluto is there. I want to tap into those places to see where those, like, maybe just where those challenges lie for me, and then ignite goodness out of that, like positivity, however that looks, like maybe that's just meditating more in ways that are just focused on those energies, or just tapping into it in different lights. So,
mm,
those are probably the biggest misconceptions that I see.
mm.
And yeah, the memes
Yeah.
don't help. The memes, as much
The
as like
memes,
sometimes I find them to be funny, and like they just don't help all the time.
the memes really don't. They really don't help. I feel like I really want to create like better astrology memes. Ones that like encompass
Yeah.
all. I don't even know if you can, because a meme is
Yeah.
basically defining something. But like
Yeah. Like a
if somehow
stereotype.
I could make a yeah, I could make a meme that's not that way, that would be awesome. But like I also agree, like I feel like what's another misconception that I wanted to say too? Um, people think that like people still think that when you're getting a reading, you're like predicting the future.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's not true. Like that is absolutely not
You're
true
actually predicting
because
the
you
past.
have yeah. And like you have
You're
something called
predicting
self-will.
yeah.
Like you can also shift into new things and like um the power of energy is misconceived in astrology, and the power of like that each sign has a world or a whole universe of its own energy. Like that
Mm-hmm.
fact is so true. And I think a lot of us forget that a lot of the time. Like
Mm-hmm.
going into just one sign, you can find so many gems within that, like one energy, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like it's just way less binary than we think it is. Like you said about the opposite of like Leo is good and Aquarius must be bad, is the opposite of that. It's like, is it possible that there are two amazingly unique things that are just themselves and not compared at all to one another? Like, aren't able to be compared? Like, can we
Yeah.
think more that way about astrology? And it's hard
Mm-hmm.
because that opposite thinking of good bad is so deep.
And I just don't think that it should even have a place in astrology. Like it astrology is one of those like arts that's more of just like it's an art, like, right? Like there's no art that's like bad because somebody else might think it's amazing. It's like the
Yeah.
dichotomy of human nature. Like humans are naturally so varied, which gives way to all of the zodiac signs in and of itself. Um, and that's
And all of
why
their expressions.
some, yeah, like you wouldn't think like an Aquarius is the most bright person in the room just because Leo is the opposite, but that's absolutely possible. It's
Mm-hmm.
about it's it's literally an art of like the human makeup and like the human traits that come through with these like patterns that people have just researched over the years. It just comes through as like all in one. So it's like all about what, you know what I mean? As you said, like we have all of the zodiac
Yeah.
signs in us. So it's all about all in one energy, but what comes through the most. And you might be like, "Oh, well that person's an Aquarius, but they have like this Scorpio thing about them." And that's like the beauty of astrology, how like things can just come through that you wouldn't expect. And
Mm.
then therefore
Yeah.
that's another thing. Like you can't be like, "Oh, they seem like a Libra to me," you know? You know, you just can't put my finger on it, but like you just that's I do that sometimes. Like when we're watching like a
Yeah.
movie, I'm like I just feel like this person's a Scorpio, like I can't help it. And then I look and they're like a Cancer or they're like a Gemini and I'm
And then you're
like
like, oh, of course.
and then I'm
You
like, "Oh
know?
yeah, I forgot that astrology can't be just like interpreted that way." You
Yeah.
know?
I think it's the art. Yeah, it's like an art of interpretation. And
Yeah.
it can be so many different ways. And like, there's something I wanted to say. I was watching something called The Sound of Creation the other night, and they're talking about how when something is like manifested into a form, fractals exist, and when things are so we're not perfect manifestations of our soul. That's what like this
Mm.
older mystic had said. And the human is the imperfections in the human is what makes each human so unique and unlike any other, is like the little
Mhm.
imperfections, you can call them. And I think that's the same with astrology, is like the way that each zodiac sign shows up in your life and comes out is so unique that you're the only one on the planet who expresses it that exact way. Like it is so
Yeah.
unique to you. And every single human has the unique expression that is needing to be expressed. And like we need everyone's art. I think
Yes.
like we need
I do too.
everyone's expression.
Yeah, and that comes down to a very cool thing that I believe in that I feel like is a really nice way to leave maybe this off. Um,
Yeah.
Nobody can compare to you and your work because of this thing that we're talking about. Like me and
Yes.
Kate are
Yes.
entrepreneurs. We have our own thing going. We have business ideas and things like that. And the thing that sometimes can yield people like us is the idea that like there's so many people out there doing the same thing. There's
Mm.
somebody who's doing this right now that it's just too similar to me or
It's too
but here's what I
saturated.
have to say to that. Here's what I have to say to that. Everybody everybody has something different to offer because you will never there's never going to be another you. And there's no other way to explain that other than basically saying like you and your experiences were unique from quite literally the minute you came out of the womb. And it's all because there wasn't a million other people in the same room as you, being born in the same time, in the same light, in the same sky. Nothing was the same. You were the only one there being born at that time,
Mm.
right? So from that point,
Mm.
you had your own unique path. You had everything happen to you, and it made you who you are. And the thing that people like nowadays is like the person behind the offering, the service, the
Yeah.
and that's why it will always be unique and you should never be discouraged to not do something because it's oversaturated or already done or
Mm.
whatever because you could make it so different and you could even bring it miles ahead in progression throughout your life. So that's what I have to say to that.
I, Absolutely. 100,000%. Like, fuck things being saturated. Fuck that. We're headed into such
Yeah.
a revolutionary time that that will literally not matter. So get that shit
Yeah,
out
it
of your
won't
head.
matter. Get that shit out of your head and start making the thing happen.
Start
Because
making
we
your
will
art.
be.
Start making your shit happen because we're still doing it and everyone needs to be doing it. I mean, you don't have to,
Yeah.
but
And it
the
will
world
take
needs
time.
your
Yeah, you
art.
don't absolutely. Yeah. The world needs
You
you.
don't have to. The
Period.
world needs you being you. Like,
Yeah.
that's a fact.
And with
Cool.
that, we wish you a
With
happy
that,
Venus and Gemini.
and happy
And well,
eclipse
yeah.
next week. Yeah.
We're gonna have the next
We'll check in.
podcast during that eclipse season.
Oh, yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
we'll check
during
in
during right.
dur- right after. We'll check in after the eclipse and then we'll
Yes.
see y'all then.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.